got a lot of choices.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Welcome. It's good to have you back. It's a little chilly outside, so I'm grateful that you made the trek over here. It's a little bit nicer, warmer in here. And tonight we're going to be talking about maybe adding a little bit more to what a lot of us saw in the movie Cabrini. And during the break, you might want to come up. There is a first-class relic of her, a piece of bone of Mother Cabrini, and that was given to me when I was ordained a priest by the Cabrini sisters. And that's because my family has a long history, connection with the nuns, which I'll probably tell you about in a little bit. But inside here, and I'm going to take that out, I became very close to the Italian sisters in New York, and they were in their 80s and 90s. And so they knew so much about the history of Mother Cabrini. Remember, she died in 1917, so she's very contemporary. And one of the sisters, Sister Adelina, knew that her life was coming to a close. And one of the last times that I met with her, she told me that she wanted to give me something, and especially because it had been given to her, and she wanted to make sure that it didn't get lost somehow after she died. And so she gave me the handkerchief of Mother Cabrini. Wow. So that's what I have right here, and we know it's Mother Cabrini's handkerchief because when you come up later to check, you'll see there's a little red stitched heart. That's because they're the missionaries of the Sacred Heart, and there is a number 1 by it. And the sisters always washed all their linens and everything together, but they all had numbers to know what belonged to who. Number 1 always belonged to Mother Cabrini. There's also a book up here, Too Small a World, and Father gifted that to me. This is a book that was written a while ago and reprinted, and it's very good if you want to get a good story of the life of Mother Cabrini. The other book that's very, very good by Sergio Loret is this one called Mother Frances Cabrini, and this also is very readable and very well written, very good. I'm going to read a little portion to you from it in a little bit so you get a taste of that. Those are the 2 best books that are out. There are books written more for children. If you read Italian, there are some books that are really large that were put out at different points in the life of the community, and it shows all the wonderful pictures of the sisters back in Italy, when they went to China, and the missions, and it's just a wonderful history if you love that kind of thing, which I do. The picture up here is Mother Frances when she was quite young. In the beginning, she wore not the veil, but she wore like a cap, almost like Mother Seton. And but she always wore the bow. And the reason why was because you'll notice that there's no white around, Le Coif or anything like that. And a lot of religious communities, like the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, you remember they used to have kind of that white bib. And it was something that you had to really take care of, and you had to starch, and it took time and so forth. And she decided that her sisters wouldn't wear anything like that they would be, let's say, more practical, for the kind of work that they were doing. Remember that back in the day, sisters, if they weren't cloistered, they still lived a pretty cloistered life. And so it wasn't common for sisters to travel all over the place, and in fact, for sisters, a community like, let's say, in the United States, to send and start communities in other countries. Usually in Italy or in France, you had communities there, and that's where they pretty much stayed. And you had a very few that really branched out. One of those would be the Daughters of St. Paul, the Charities, Mother Seton. We have kind of a development of religious life that's happening in the late 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s upwards. And so there is a time when Mother spends some time, I believe it was with the Sisters of Charity, and they were the ones, I read an account that said, Mother, put a veil on, it'll keep you warmer. And so then she added the veil, and then all the sisters wore the veil. So there's sometimes people will ask, well, why did they wear what they wore? And up until pretty recently, many of us remember the Sisters in Full Habits. And it's true that a lot of times they wore the garb of the day. And so this would have been a common garb of a woman of middle class to wear that kind of a long dress and so forth, and even a veil if you're in Italy or other places, Portugal, other places. But the difference for religious communities is they decided to wear the same thing. Even though it may have been the garb of the day, all of them wore that. And that was the way they identified that they were from a certain institute. So Mother then added the veil. She added the bow because she wanted people to know that nuns are joyful. And she didn't want to have that kind of idea that nuns are sad, and especially because they wear black. And so she added the big bow as a sign of the perpetual joy that sisters have belonging to Jesus Christ. Okay? So it's very, very nice. And they wore the rosary beads. They wore a ring because they were spouses of Christ. And they wore the large silver cross that you see on all her pictures. You'll see that a little bit later. And the silver cross had on the back the name of the sister, and I believe it was the date of their consecration, that they made their final vows. So the veil itself was not heavy. It was really light, and it was really just part of the mission of the sisters to move quickly and to have a habit that wouldn't show dirt. So if you wore a habit, God bless them, I love the Dominicans, and I almost became a Dominican, but Dominicans were white. And I always kid the Norbertines about that too, is, I know you don't do much work because you're never dirty. So, no, they kid me, don't worry. So Mother Frances was her given name, Frances. Xavier was not part of her given name. She was Maria Francesca, Mary Frances. And then later, when she developed her vocation, she took on the name Xavier. And that was because of St. Francis Xavier. So from the very beginning, as a little child, Frances had this idea of being a missionary. And in particular, she had a great calling, she felt, to go to China and to bring the faith to China. Because remember, St. Francis Xavier had gone, and he died he went through Japan, and he had a lot of converts, but he just wore himself out. And so he died before he could really establish China. And so Mother always thought that she would be the one to continue the work of Francis Xavier. She herself never got to China, but her sisters did. And then, unfortunately, we have the big Cultural Revolution, which destroyed everything. And so many religious communities in China were thrown out, were persecuted. And I think I told you a story before of one of Mother Cabrini's nuns, an Italian sister, very elderly, who on Christmas Eve, when my parents and myself and my brother, we brought little gifts for them for Christmas, oranges, perfume that smelled like violet, because violets were Mother Cabrini's favorite flower, but they couldn't have any other kind of perfume, just that. And simple things like that, toothbrushes, things like that. So we brought all these kind of things. We could bring them on Christmas, but you couldn't bring those things to the sisters any other time. There was just that kind of a strict life that you couldn't have favorites, you know? So you never had one sister that had more than another sister and so forth. It was a very regimented kind of life. But on Christmas Eve, that was a little different. And you remember I told you the story how the sisters came out. They weren't expecting us that late. And when we arrived, their cheeks were all rosy red, and they were giggling and embarrassed because they finally told us, they said, no, we had a little wine, it's Christmas Eve. They said, we never have wine, it's just Christmas Eve. You know? And it was very sweet. And so while everyone's talking, Sister Jesuina, one of the older sisters, took me aside, and here I'm a little kid. And she showed me her hands. Remember, she showed me her hands, and she had no nails. And she said, I was in China. And she said, and the communists, they buried me alive. And she said, but Jesus got me out. I got out. And she said, my nails never grow back, never grow back. She says, but my badge of honor. So you can just imagine the deep, deep faith of our religious sisters, and especially in the days when they went into the missions and into impossible situations. When they came here to the United States, which you'll see a little bit. And remember, when we watched the movie, we really had an invitation into the way it was. And I was thinking through the movie how wonderful for Italians, because part of their story finally gets told of how rough it was and the kind of prejudice that was there. But this would be for the Chinese when they came over. This has been for the Hispanics, Mexicans when they come over. I mean, it's just sort of our story. And then somehow, too, by God's grace, I hope, we make it. You know, we become part of the fabric of the United States. That's been our story. For some communities, it's been more difficult. For the African American community, more difficult. But for other communities, they've excelled. And until recently, this is really now, I think, a moment of great challenge for the United States as to who we are now, right now, and how we pull ourselves together. And so these next few years, I think, are very pivotal. Mother Cabrini would have been very interested in that. And I have in one of the slides that you remember, there's a line where Mother says, we don't wait for the government to do what we're supposed to do. The government doesn't need to tell me what I need to do. I know what I need to do, see? And that's Catholicism, right? So remember that we are the first ones to establish hospitals. And we're the first ones to establish universities and colleges. There weren't any before. See, so people understood the need. Seminaries. It was Charles Borromeo that started seminaries. There weren't any before, Vincent de Paul. You know, at the time, places, asylums for people that had lost their minds. Because you know where they ended up. You know those stories. They ended up in people's attics or basements, and they were chained up and treated like animals. They didn't know what to do with them. And so it was the Catholic Church that began to set aside places to try, at that time at least, to give the best that medicine could give, which today we think, oh my goodness, you know. But at the time, that was the best that people knew. And so at least the sisters, the church provided places for people to be gathered together where they wouldn't be abused that way, and where there were nuns who took good care of them the best they could. Do you remember the nun story? Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful movie with Audrey Hepburn, not Catherine, yeah, Audrey Hepburn, beautiful actress, and a beautiful movie that shows really very closely religious life and the different stages and so forth of religious life. It has a sad ending because she leaves at the end for various interior conflicts and so forth. And I remember my mother used to watch that every time it came on TV, because remember, those are the days when you didn't control what was going to come on TV. And when something came on TV, you got all excited about it, you know. And my mom would get excited about the nun story when it would come on TV. And I'd say, Mom, you know how it's going to end. And she said, maybe not this time. But the story in the movie, it really plays out the great difficulties that sisters went through and the challenges of life. And that's the real deal, you know. And so it's very important, I think, when we look back, especially at this time in our country and the time in the church, that we recognize that the sisters were an important bridge of compassion and understanding and sensitivity in a world that was really cruel at times. And the sisters put up with a lot. But amazingly, and you'll hear this so often about religious communities that came to the U.S. from maybe France or Spain or Italy, that they arrived with nothing, and it's true. They arrived with just pennies. Imagine that. You go into a whole different country, and that's the way you start. You know, you got nothing, and you're just going to beg. And that's what they did. And they built these magnificent hospitals and universities, and, you know, that it was done by God's grace. You know, and the movie, Cabrini, really, I think it's exceptional in how it shows how Mother, against so many odds, so much against her, was able to do so much. And she did that by persuasion. And she did that also by a deep, deep, rock-solid confidence. Keep in mind that this nun was not even 5 feet high. She was a small lady. And keep in mind that she never mastered English. So she spoke with an Italian accent. And yet, she also created a Cabrini method of teaching that became very popular in schools. And that was when a child gets aggressive or gets mean or yells or something like that, the nun or the teacher is not to correct the child in front of all the other children. She used to take the child away and outside and then correct the child, talk to the child, encourage the child. And she said, but you're not to yell at the child. You're never to hit the child. See? And this was different because it was common. You know, when I was a kid, remember you were a kid and you got spanked sometimes, right? That's the way our parents did it. You know, today you can't do that today. My gosh, you know, you'd be put in jail or something if you spank your kid. But back in the day, that was the way it happened in family and outside of family. That's the way it happened in schools. And so Mother was ahead of everything that way, in that she said, no, the child will learn and be shaped and formed by you to be a son and daughter of Jesus Christ. You know, the Sacred Heart. To great, great devotion to the Sacred Heart, especially, and to the Madonna, as she called her. Okay. Interestingly enough, when I talked to the Mother Teresa sisters, they told me that Mother Teresa was present at Mother Cabrini's canonization, and that 3 years later, Mother Teresa began her community, and that she took great inspiration from Mother Cabrini in order to take that next step. And that throughout her life, Mother Cabrini was her favorite saint, was the one that inspired her. And if you look at Mother Teresa, and maybe even size-wise, But if you look at both of them, you see great similarities in how they approached things. Their tremendous sense of God. If you read Mother Cabrini's diaries, it's all about God and all about the Sacred Heart. And this is what's missing in the movie. Because the movie obviously is about a nun who is dedicated to her faith. There's no question. That comes across. But in the movie, she never says the name Jesus. And she never prays. Did you notice that? And the director, I saw an interview with him, and he said the reason why we didn't do that is because we had to bring it down to a level where it would attract as many people as possible. So that's what they were going for. My criticism is you could have showed just one scene and it would have done it. And there was plenty of things that they could have pictured in Mother Cabrini's life. For instance, there's a time when she goes to France to start a new foundation, and she has a lot of opposition and difficulty in finding land and so forth, and somewhat discouraged, wondering, okay, I need a sign, I need to know what to do. And she sits down, and then a whole flock of blackbirds come, and then they sit all over her, on her veil, on her shoulders, on everything, and they just twitter. And just very joyfully. And everyone saw it, and then they take off, and Mother Cabrini took that as a sign that I'm doing the right thing, this is the right direction. And within a year, she had her foundation for children in France. And so she was very connected to, not superstitious, but connected to signs that she felt were helping her in the directions that she chose, that she thought the Sacred Heart wanted her to move into. She was wonderful in this too. Sometimes there was opposition that was so strong, and she did not, and you get the idea in the film sometimes, that she just dug her heels in until she won. And that wasn't always Mother Cabrini too, because there were a couple of times where, for whatever reason, maybe a new bishop came into a diocese and they were not favorable to her community. And she would pick them all up and leave. And they'd go to another diocese that wanted them. But she would not, she loved her sisters very much as daughters, and she would not put them through suffering that wasn't needed or wasn't going to bear fruit if she thought. She'd just close up the mission and start somewhere else. And I really admired that, because that's a difficult decision to make. And it tells me she was not afraid to fail. She was not afraid for something to fall apart. And she knew that God would open another door. Okay. So the movie was released on March 8th, not so long ago. The director, Alejandro Monteverde, is a Catholic, and he's the director of The Sound of Freedom. Do you remember that movie? It's a very important movie as well. Really impacted. It really impacted the United States in a very powerful way, especially about a topic that's very painful and one that in great measure people don't like to talk about, and that's understandable, but it's happening all around us. That's the terrible thing. And that's becoming more and more apparent. And I'm going to give you two examples. The first example is the music world right now is going through a tornado with one of the great music masters in rap and so forth, who looks like he may be the center of a lot of abuse and children being trafficked and so forth. And so that's kind of unraveling right now. But also, and one that this really bothers me, is that with this unfettered movement of people from other countries into our country without vetting, there's a lot of problems here. But one of the things that is really, really concerning to me is that there's, for instance, a lot of children from Mexico who are sent over alone, if you can believe it. And I fault their parents for it, except you have to understand that in Mexico right now, things are sometimes so desperate because there's so much corruption. And especially with the people that are supposed to protect people. They've been taken over by the cartels. And there's so much violence. The priests that have spoken out directly against the drug cartels have been murdered in Mexico. So it's almost a given that if you do that, if you preach against what's going on with the cartels, you're probably not going to last very long. It's that bad. And you think, well, that's Mexico. It's Catholic. Well, it is, but it's been taken over. And so families are willing to give their children to a neighbor or somebody else to take over to the United States, hoping that that child will find a better life. There's also a great upsurge in satanic religion in Mexico, and it's the Grim Reaper. And it is especially taken by the cartels. This is their Jesus. And if you were to watch their rituals, it looks like Mass. They have someone dressed like a priest and so forth. And it's all satanic. It's what we would call satanic. Santa Muerte, Holy Death. But it's a Grim Reaper with a skull and everything. It's very awful, ugly. And there's statues of this, you know. And they have this one place in Mexico where the image has got to be maybe 20, 30 feet high. It's that, you know, that's the center of this ugly thing. And you know, how does that happen where Lady of Guadalupe, you know, came down from heaven and left her image? It's the only apparition where the Virgin Mary left her image from heaven. There's no other country or culture that can claim that. And yet, there is so much darkness that is falling on the Mexican nation. So at least to understand and maybe to have compassion and prayer for situations that, thank God, we're not in that desperate a situation where we're trying to get out and escape. But if we're not careful, it could happen to us too. So the world is changing quickly, isn't it? California is changing quickly. I'll be honest with you about that. You know that. And I'll tell you that. You know, this is a very difficult time for the United States. And people who claim to be Catholic in authority, and like St. Paul says, there'll come a time when bad is good and good is bad. We're kind of in that time right now. So March 9th, St. Anne's sells out AMC, Marina Pacifica Theater in Long Beach. Thank you, Arlene. Arlene's back there. She really organized this for us. And it was a great success. So we were all able to go and watch this movie together. And April 2023, the movie grossed that much money, $19.7 million, which was a huge surprise to the film industry, once again. There's been a few movies that have done that, Sound of Freedom, Nefarious, some really good movies that have come out, and now Cabrini. And it shows that people, not just Catholics, because this is a lot of people, this is more than Catholics. There are a lot of people that are looking for a message that's going to build them up and make them feel proud and good, right? And give them a sense of their own direction. Definitely, Cabrini is about getting involved in making the world better, stronger. And that's something that seems to have resonated with people. 91% is the critics' review that were positive, and they said great acting, the scenery, the music is beautiful, it's PG-13, so there's no sex scenes and there's no violence, you know, where people are lopping heads off and that kind of thing. And so a PG-13 movie still made it. And that ought to say something, because there's a lot of movies that come out now that it almost seems like they have to throw in something that has nothing to do with the movie. And if you took it out, it would still be a great movie. But Hollywood puts it in because they think that's what you want. Otherwise, you won't go see the movie. So this is one of those times, again, that we demonstrate to Hollywood, no, that's not what the majority of people are looking for. If you listen to us. John Lithgow, David Morse, these are two fine actors. John Lithgow is actually a great comedian. And so this was one of those rare moments where he did play Winston Churchill in that series about the Queen, The Crown. Did a wonderful job with that. And here he is now in this movie. That was not a true character. That was a compilation of different people. But the movie Cabrini actually follows very closely the life of Mother Cabrini. So when it says based on a true story, it really is true. You know, what she went through, where she went, the archbishop who said, no, go back to Italy. And she says, no, the Pope has sent me here, and this is where I'm staying, and so forth. These are all true moments. The movie's been considered a great success. The audience score was 98%, and it still is. So if you were to look up Cabrini on the movie sites, yeah, Rotten Tomatoes or these.
IMDb.
Yes. Yeah, you'll see that it's a very high percentage still. And that, I have to tell you, is amazing, because you never get the critics and the viewership on the same level. Usually it's the critics hate it, or it's about 50% or something, and then the viewership maybe is 90. But this time both got captured, and that's really wonderful. This is one of those pictures of Mother Cabrini before she received or took on the veil. So she's born July 15th, 1850 in Italy. She died December 22nd, and that used to be her feast day until the calendar was reformed by Pope Paul VI. And then her feast day was placed November 13th. Canonized July 7th, 1946. She was supposed to be canonized a saint earlier than that, but the war got in the way. And so during World War, there were no canonizations, okay, World War II. Everything had to hold off. Buried in New York. She did not want to go back to Italy to be buried. And the last thing she was doing, you know, remember in the movie it said that she had maybe 2 years of life left because, you know, her lungs and so forth, tuberculosis, and then she died at 67, right? But that last year of her, couple years of her life, people thought she was dying. The nuns thought she was dying, and then she would just simply get this burst of energy, and she'd get on another train and travel to another place to open a new foundation and so forth. So this happened over and over again with her, until finally that year in 1946, she was at Columbus Hospital, and that was a hospital that she had founded, and it was Christmas time, and there were 500 or so orphans that were not going to get presents that year because there was not enough funding for it. And so she went out and she had cookies and candies and all bought and then boxed for all 500 to give to them. She told her sisters that that year all the nuns were going to get new habits, including herself. So that was very rare. And there were a lot of these kind of things that she decided that last year that people think she knew that she was not going to make it beyond that year. And then finally, the day she died, she was wrapping little candies for the orphans. And she was there in her night dress, had woken up in the morning and was working on the candies. And then one of the sisters came in to see her and see how she was. And then she left, and she heard the lock, right, the key lock in the door. And Mother would do that because she would, when she did that, that meant she was going to dress now in her habit. And she locked it, and so that was no surprise. But then the sister, before she had walked too far away, heard it unlock. And so then she came back. When she opened the door, Mother had died. She had maybe 2 more breaths, and then she died. And so immediately throughout New York, Chicago, Denver, all these places gathered together because she had made such an incredible impact on the United States. So she was buried in New York, and her body is still there. And if you go to Mother Cabrini High School in Manhattan, it's a beautiful chapel, and her body is under the altar. It's a glass altar where the Mass is celebrated, and you can see her body there. And then in the back of the chapel is her habit, her worn out shoes, all the little things that, rosary and these things that she used. Also in Denver, Colorado, if you ever go to Golden, Colorado, there is a major shrine of Mother Cabrini there. Sisters are there, and it's another beautiful kind of retreat center. And you can just stop off from the freeway, and there you are. And they have a path that goes up the mountain, and it takes a little bit to get there, I think, it would for me now these days. And when you get to the very top, there is these big white stones made in the shape of a heart. And then there's, I think, a big crucifix there. But the stones, that's what Mother Cabrini put down. So she put the stones down like that. And so the sisters have kept that, and they have like a glass case even around the stones. Mother was miraculous during her life as she has been after her death. So even when she was alive, there were great miracles that happened. And there's not a lot of attention given to this, but in the beginning, she wanted to be a sister, but she went to a couple of different religious communities, and they said no because her health was so poor. And so finally, there was a bishop of the local church there who was a friend of hers, and he said, why don't you teach? You want to be a teacher, so teach. So she taught. And then the bishop asked her to help the Tondini sisters. These were 2 sisters who had taken, they had a huge house, they were wealthy, and they had taken on girls to educate them, teenage girls. Well, it turned out that they were beating up the girls and very harassing and that kind of thing. And the bishop became very concerned about this because it's a Catholic institution. And so he told Cabrini, look, why don't you go and teach there and see if you can impact these women, help them. And so Mother Cabrini went. Now, at this time, she's still Francis. She's not a nun. And so she taught there. And later on, we find out that the Tondinis began beating up Francis, too. And she would get in the way of the girls to stop the beatings and things like this. Well, the girls fell in love with her, really loved her, and saw that she was genuine. Well, finally, the bishop finds out how bad it is. And so what is the next thing he does? He makes the 2 Tondini sisters nuns. Because surely that will change them. And it didn't. So now you have 2 nuns who are beating up the girls and beating up Francis. And finally, the bishop excommunicated the Tondinis, closed down the orphanage, and the girls, there were 6 or 7 that were especially close to Francis. He told Francis, you want to be a nun? I'll make you a nun, and you will be now mother. So you're in charge. And so she left that place with 6 or 7 of these girls. They became her first nuns. And they went into the forest. They had no place to go. And the story is that as they went into the forest, all of a sudden, there was this light that came out of nowhere. and it led them through the forest until they came to a Franciscan friary that had been let go years and years before it was in ruins, but enough where they could spend the night there, a roof and so forth. And so that became their first foundation, this Franciscan friary that had, been empty for years and years. So there's all these stories, like the birds and the light and these kind of things that follow Mother throughout her life that the sisters remember. There is a time when there was one sister with very, very bad varicose veins, very painful for her. And so she went into Mother Cabrini's room and opened the little drawer and took out her stockings and then put on her stockings. And her legs were healed completely. And she went and told Mother and the whole community. She said, "It's a miracle." She said, "Your stockings have cured me." And Mother Cabrini just laughed, and she said, "Well, they never did anything for me." And that's the way she was. Just like Mother Teresa, you got to deflect it, right? They don't want that kind of pride, And yet there is a deep, deep prayer life of this nun. So that at night, the sisters would sleep two to a room, and the story is that there was the sister that slept with Mother would see that in the middle of the night there would be a great light in the corner of the room, and Mother would go to the light and be talking to it, and she interpreted that to be the Holy Spirit. And so when Mother realized that someone was listening, then she made the decision that she would never have anyone else in her room when she slept at night. And so her prayer life was very personal. Mother made sure that it was personal. So her diaries, all that kind of thing, that's the only way we know what was happening, the depth of the spiritual life was through her diaries. If it wasn't for that, and it was a little challenging for them to, because when you're going to make a saint, you have to pull together a lot of information to show that this person actually loved Jesus and really, was blessed by God, and that there's some kind of relationship and so forth. If it wasn't for the diaries, it would have been very difficult to pinpoint all that, because she made sure not to pull any attention to herself, even miracles. The backstory. So late 19th century is a time of expansion, heavy immigration throughout the world, and it's the poor who lead, like often happens. And so Cabrini has her heart set on China, as we heard, in the steps of Francis Xavier, but it's Pope Leo XIII who says no. And Pope Leo XIII in his own right is an extraordinary pope. He's the one that gave us the social, the social justice, or, arm of the church. In other words, taking doctrine and teaching and then translating that into the practical life. So how do we take this love and mercy and compassion that we believe we should have and that Christ has, and how do we make that real, that Catholics should shape and form themselves this way, because this is how we live compassion and mercy and justice and so forth. In fact, when the Soviet Union fell, the Orthodox Church reached out to the Pope, John Paul, and asked him to send the encyclicals, especially of Leo XIII, so that they could begin to shape and form their new society with the virtues and so forth of religion, of Christianity. So this Pope is extremely important, and very important for the missions that go throughout the world. So it's another expansion throughout the world of missionary work. Okay. You remember this in the movie, which is quite true of what happened. Mother Cabrini says to the Holy Father, I want to go to China. And then he says, not to China, but to the United States. Not to the east, but to the west. And that's true. That's what he told her. And so she immediately changed her whole vision. And this is something extraordinary about Mother Cabrini too, is that when, we'll call it, at that time they would have called it legitimate authority, your superior would say something, a different direction, she really believed in obedience. And she really believed that through obedience, God talks. And so when the Holy Father said no to the east, there was no fight. It was simply, okay, how do I do this now? I have to change my direction, my community. We're going to go to the west. And remember the Holy Father says, you know, because Mother Cabrini used to say, the world is too small for me. And that's when the Holy Father says, you remember, well, Mother, if the world is that small and too small, then what does it matter where you start? You know? And so she had a very warm and very profound relationship with Pope Leo. And constantly was writing to him, asking how he was feeling, how he was doing. There was a time, you know, with the war or the threats of war that there was rumors that the Holy Father was going to be taken hostage. And Mother Cabrini had written letters to him saying, come and we will hide you. We will find a place for you. You know, I think it was even, she said, even in the United States, come and we'll protect you. You know, so this was a kind of great love. It didn't matter that we're not the United States. You know, why would the Pope go to the United States? No, that didn't matter. What mattered to her was she had a plan. You know, she had another plan. And this was always very surprising to her sisters, was that she would just have a plan and then she would run with it, you know. So, of course, thank God, Pope Leo never had to leave Rome. But definitely, as a religious, she had a tremendous respect and love for the Holy Father. So she heads out to the U.S., to New York, and you saw how the Archbishop said, sorry, you know, because there was a miscommunication. And he didn't have anything ready for her. But a little harsh, I think, to say, you know, get on the next ship and go back home to Italy. And it's true, she pulled out the letter from the Pope and said, your superior has written this. And she says, so here I stay, you know, because he's higher than you. You know? And so she stayed. And again, the Italian immigration, we're looking at mostly uneducated, poor, unable to speak English. There's the frustration and poverty now that leads to crime and trafficking. Mostly farmers and single men who came over, trying to make a life and send back money, you know, to families that are back in Italy. You saw the squalor in the movie that was really depicted quite well, I think, as to kind of get to us the awfulness of that kind of situation, the dirt and the mud and all of this kind of thing. And the poor sisters, you know, these sisters would go into bars and to pull men out, husbands that the wives were looking for them, they'd go into the bars and pull them out. And these sisters really, Mother had them going anywhere and everywhere in order to save souls. And she was opposed, as you got a little taste of, she was opposed also by certain factors of the church. So there were certain men in the church who felt that this was not the place of a religious, because they were used to a cloistered idea of religious life. There were other communities of sisters that sometimes were not happy that a new community had come in and was, doing little earthquakes like that and doing work and getting success that maybe they were not able to get. It's just human frailty, right? It's human frailty. And, but she just kept on. There's an increase of racism and prejudice at the time, a spike in the Ku Klux Klan. Catholic churches were being burned to the ground. There's a lot of persecution going on. When we tried to build our church in Tustin, we were not able to do it. Do you remember Monsignor Salmon? He's kind of a legend. He's kind of he's the priest, the ideal priest in Diocese of Orange. And he was a pastor, the founding, not that he was the second pastor to come in. The founding pastor only lasted a few months. And then Monsignor Salmon came in and took over. He really was the pastor for a long time. But he was going to build St. Cecilia's on Newport Boulevard, just kind of a busy street. And the Ku Klux Klan wouldn't let him. Ku Klux Klan were very, very powerful at that time still, in Tustin. And so St. Cecilia's was forced to build her church in the neighborhood. And that was so that the less people would notice and see that they're around. And so that land that was supposed to be the first St. Cecilia's, all these years stayed empty because of opposition. And finally, now it is Clearwater, which is a place for older folks. And we have, I think, 2 or 3 of our priests in retirement there now. But that finally got built. But it took a long time for anything to finally get built there. Now, of course, Ku Klux Klan is gone. They're not there in Tustin. And there was, I won't tell you which, but there was a Protestant church in Tustin that was very anti-Catholic. And now, not so at all. Times have changed. But there was a time when anti-Catholicism was really rampant, even here in Orange County. So in 1891, something terrible happens in New Orleans where a mob lynches 11 Italians. There was a man who was murdered, and so immediately mobs formed because they thought it was the Italians that did this. And so over 100 people, 100 Italians were hurt in this melee. And then these 11, there were 16, I think, that were taken and put into jail to await court. And a mob came and forced themselves in and took 11 of them and hung them. So without trial, without anything, they were innocent. And so this is what Mother Cabrini walked into, this kind of fever pitch feeling against Italians. And so with her 6 nuns, she begins her mission. Hits and misses. She established 67 hospitals, orphanages, schools, and social service organizations. That's here in the U.S. only. She's all over the world. She set up nuns in California, New York, New Jersey, New Orleans, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Mississippi, Illinois, Colorado, Washington State. She went everywhere. If you go to the cathedral in Fort Worth, Texas, that's where Bishop Ann was before, they placed there a beautiful statue of Mother Cabrini very close to the altar. And they placed it there because Mother Cabrini used to go, when she would travel through Texas, she would go to Mass there at Fort Worth. And so they've never forgotten that. Mother Cabrini lived in Los Angeles. Many times she would stop off in LA because they had an orphanage on, what's that called? Hill Street in LA. And that's up kind of on a hill, on a mountain. I guess that's why it's called Hill Street. And then if you were to go down, the Croatian church is there. St. Anthony's Croatian church. that's still there. But the orphanage, where the nuns were, where we used to go as a family, that got destroyed in the Northridge earthquake. And so the sisters had to leave. And so they went back to Denver and Philadelphia. And so the sisters notified my family that they were going to be leaving and they were going to have a fire sale. And it actually wasn't, you didn't buy anything. They were actually just giving away whatever they could give away because they couldn't take it with them. And so we went, and my family ended up with Mother Cabrini's bureau and some of her chairs, that she used, and that's at my parents' home. And there was this wonderful statue of Mother Cabrini, lifelike, very lifelike, and that was the one that was in the main chapel. And so we saw this beautiful statue get moved out, and everything had to be taken out, put into this back pickup truck, and then taken away. And then realizing nobody knew who that was or where they were taking it, and so that it's somewhere that the main image there disappeared. Someone took it. And so it's in some private home somewhere, I suppose. And so the sisters just said, well, God's will, and we can't get upset about it. And so, again, that whole sense of the will of God, and even something so precious as that, they had to let go of that. So here we have in the rest of the world, Mexico, Nicaragua, Brazil, Guatemala, all these places where the sisters went. Mother Cabrini, went to the Alps. She almost fell in a big crevice, on a donkey and trying to get from, one place to another. It's just, she's really an adventurer, and quite a life. It makes a good movie. And did you ever see Auntie Mame with Rosalind Russell? It's that kind of adventure. If you haven't seen that, it's an old movie, but it's a really good movie, funny, and I kind of get the sense sometimes when I've watched that many times in the past of that spirit that woman had in that movie, Mame, that Cabrini had. She just sees everything differently. There are some people like that. They're able to see the same thing we see, but they see it somehow differently, and they see possibilities, and they see happiness and joy where there isn't any. And things that get in the way, don't destroy them. Even sufferings, don't stop them. It's a quality of saints. This is Mother very close to her death. And this is a couple of things that she said. As I see it, the mission is this: loving other human beings wherever they are in the world, and letting them know that there is a God who loves them unconditionally now as they are. And I think how that resonates today with how we talk, especially in the church, that there is something called, you and I are created in the image and likeness of God. And because of that, each one of us is a treasure right now, not tomorrow. And God is relating to you now who you are, not who you wish you were or who you hope to be, but right now who you are. He's in love with you right now. In spite of all the things that you get frustrated with about yourself, he does not get frustrated with that. He loves you. He wants more, of course. But it's a little hard for us sometimes to wrap our minds around this, that God could be that generous and that in love with us. And that's part of our problem as believers, Catholics or Protestants. That's part of our problem, I think, is that we know it up here, but it's hard to get it in here. To really feel and sense that the Sacred Heart loves me, and the Immaculate Heart loves me, and Mother Cabrini loves me, and St. Michael loves me, and St. Anne loves me, and so forth, you know. And that this is all built on relationship. So Catholicism is very unique this way, very beautiful this way, that it's as much as we have our Protestant friends who talk about a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, but this is something that comes first from Catholicism, because it is the Eucharist that we come into relationship with. It is confession where we meet the mercy of Jesus in a tangible way, right? This anointing of the sick as we get close to leaving this world, where God comes to us and says, don't be afraid, I'm here. I love this image of Pope Francis gave us this image, which I think is extraordinary, where he says, when we are passing from this life to the next life, he says, it's like a door that you go through. And he says, but on the other side of the door, you will see the Mother of God. And she will be beckoning you to come to her. And he said, when you see her asking you to come to her, you won't be afraid. Right? I think it's glorious, beautiful. That's the way it should be for a believer. She will take you by the hand, and then she will take you to her Son. See? Beautiful. That's the role of Mary. See? And no one ever dies alone, right? No one ever dies alone. Even if there's nobody in the room, you still don't die alone. It would be impossible, because you have, first of all, your guardian angel with you all the time, especially at death. Your angel's not going to disappear or go on vacation or something. Your angel especially is going to be there at that moment to help you. Your favorite saints will be there to help you. The Mother of God will be there to help you, because they love you. And when people, you know how it is when we love someone who's passing, what do? We try to rush home, right? People can get on planes and fly home from out of state because they want to be there before the person passes. It's important. How much more so for the ones in heaven who love us? So this is why, again, you never be afraid. Don't you ever be afraid when that moment comes, because you're not alone. And God willing, you'll have friends and family around you, but if you don't, you're not alone. Open your eyes wide, and you will see heaven coming down to you. Right? Okay. The second, oh Jesus, there is nothing else left for me. I must love thee or die. Okay. And this is the spirit of Cabrini. And this is what I wish had been really a part of the movie, but escaped it somehow. And for people who were really Catholic that put this together, and I understand the we'll call it dumbing it down so that other people would, catch on to it. But if she had been shown even just carrying the rosary, or in a moment of strife saying, dear Jesus, anything like that, that would have, I think, made it perfect. So we lost a moment there. Let's take a break for 15 minutes, and then we'll close.